All right, well, it's a minute after 6, just like I promised. I want to let people get into the room here, or we're saying room sort of facetiously at this point on these Zoom meetings. It kind of feels like a room. And I see we have some folks calling in, so just to reiterate, if you are calling in and you're not also viewing slides at the same time or viewing your screen at the same time, there may be an opportunity to jot down some email addresses and phone numbers potentially that you might need. So if you want to grab a pen and a piece of paper, you still have a couple minutes to do that. We're going to do some introductory stuff here just to get us started. So the first thing I want to do is just welcome you to the informational session for the draft renewable operating permit for L'Anse Warden Electric Company. Hopefully that's why you're here and you're not spending your evening doing this just for fun. So just to be clear before we really get started, when we originally advertised this meeting tonight, we were going to do an informational session and the public hearing in the same night. So just to let you know, we did get a request to extend the comment period for this draft renewable operating permit, and in efforts to be able to honor that, we did go ahead and extend the comment period all the way out until October 21st. So tonight we're just going to do an informational session, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes here. And then on the 21st, we're going to be doing the virtual public hearing. So you don't need to necessarily participate in that. If you want to submit a comment on this draft renewable operating permit, I'll talk about other ways you can do that a little bit later tonight as well. But if you want to, of course, we would welcome you joining us for that night. All right, so this is how we're going to kind of spend our night tonight, and not the whole night. I won't keep you forever. The first thing I want to do is introduce you to the staff that I have here today, and I guess I should start with myself. I know I haven't met a lot of the folks on the line. My name is Jennifer Dixon, and work really closely with Air Quality Division and help them moderate a lot of our public meetings. The other person that you're going to be primarily hearing from tonight is Ed Lancaster, and he is in our UP district office. So he's going to be talking to you about specifics related to the draft permit tonight. You can see Julie Brenner on the screen as well, and she works with our all of our different renewable operating permits across the state, trying to create consistency and things like that. So we're happy to have her with us. I have Brian Hughes, he's from our toxicology unit. So when we get to the question and answer portion of the night, he's going to be able to help answer questions related to that if anyone has any. Susan Kilmer is with our monitoring unit. So she'd be able to answer questions about air monitoring if you happen to have them. And I do have a few other people on the line that I want to introduce. Katie Cruz is going to be on our panel, and she helps us out, our whole department, EGLE, with tribal relations. So if folks have questions related to that, she's certainly available to answer them. Although I will say she's kind of in transit right now, heading up to the UP to hopefully visit all the beauty that's going on up there right now. So she might have limited availability depending on how that goes. Chris Etheridge is our field operations supervisor for Air Quality Division, and he's actually the decision maker on this draft permit. And so he's just listening in tonight to kind of hear questions that everybody has related to this and try to just get a feel for the direction things are going. Joe Scanlon is one of our inspectors up in our UP district, and he works with L'Anse as well. And I also have my boss on the line, Jim Ostrowski, and he's going to be helping me behind the scenes with some of the logistics potentially just with Zoom and things like that. All right, so panelists, if you guys want to turn your cameras off, except for Ed, because I'm going to pass it over to you in just a minute, so be ready for that. So the first thing we're going to do tonight is do the information session, and that's just going to basically involve a short presentation that Ed's going to do about a little bit about Air Quality Division and how we work for folks who might be new to that, and then some specifics about L'Anse and some specifics about the draft permit. Then we're going to do a question and answer session. So, and I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about this in a moment on the next slide, but that's basically going to be an opportunity where you can either type in a question and we will answer it, or you'll have an opportunity to raise your hand virtually, and I'll tell you how to do that in a minute as well. And you could be able to speak your question out loud. After we get done with that, we're going to talk about other ways that you can submit a comment. So if you are intending to submit a comment tonight, and obviously we're not going to be taking official comments on the record, and maybe you can't attend the virtual public hearing on the 21st, but you still want to submit a comment, we'll talk about other ways that you can do that, because certainly participating in these meetings is not the only way to do that. We'll talk a little bit about where to find other information, and I will give you guys some contacts, mostly from our panel, if you have other questions and want to reach out to them directly. So the first thing I want to talk about before I kind of switch gears is in your Zoom toolbar, there is a chat bubble. So if you click on that, I've already shared a link to where you can find information about this draft renewable operating permit. So if you're looking for specifics related to that, you want to read the staff report or look at the draft conditions and you haven't had an opportunity to do that, all of that is located at that link. Just a caveat, if you do click that link, you can always scroll down until you find L'Anse. It's not the top one on the list. So I just wanted to let folks know that if they go to that link and they're like, where's L'Anse on here? She said it was going to be here. You just need to scroll down a little bit. All right, so a couple just housekeeping things before we get started. All of your lines are going to be muted. So like I said, once we get to the question and answer, if you want to ask a question verbally, I'll talk to you about how to raise your hand. We are going to be recording this meeting. Once it's over, we do send it out to get closed captioned, and then we make it available on YouTube, and we will share the recording of the meeting with you so that you can have that if you want to look at it later, or if you know anybody who wasn't able to join us tonight but's interested. So getting back to how to ask a question. So as you're listening to Ed chat about air quality division and the renewable operating permit, and you're thinking about questions that you might have, you can type them in at any time. So you're just going to want to type them into that question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Once we get to the question and answer portion at the end and I open it up, that's when you would be raising your hand to ask questions. So I know we can't see you, so don't do this. Just click that hand icon at the bottom of your screen. Or if you're calling in, what you're going to do is type *9 into your phone, and that will raise your hand for us to be able to see, and then we will call on you. Folks on the phone, if you do raise your hand like that, I will be calling on you based on the last 3 digits of your phone number. So make sure you know what those are, because I know for me, sometimes I get mine and my kids and my husband's confused, and when people ask me my number, I say the wrong one. So just be aware of that's the way we're sort of going to navigate that. So Ed, I think I'm going to pass it over to you now. And just as a reminder for you, I know I'm going to be advancing the slides for you, so just let me know when you need me to move ahead there. But otherwise, if you want to just unmute yourself and you can go ahead whenever you want.
Okay, thanks, Jen. As Jen mentioned, my name's Ed Lancaster. I'm the district supervisor. Many of you on the call, we have probably met and talked quite a bit over the last several years as we've been working through this ROP process. I'm going to go through the slides pretty quick just because I think we've all been there. We've through our previous meetings, and it just a little bit, pollution comes from a lot of different things, such as big farms, fuel burning vehicles, and various industrial sources. And tonight we're going to concentrate on the L'Anse Warden Electric Company. The overall mission of the Air Quality Division is to protect the public health and the environment, and the AQD has the authority to do this by regulating industrial sources. Next slide, Jen. So ways that we, functions of the AQD, we monitor levels of air pollutants, examine toxic air contaminants to ensure public health is protected, conduct inspections of industrial sources of air pollutants for compliance with with rules and permits, and review applications and write permits to meet regulations. Next slide, please. Air permitting of industrial sources. We have the authority to regulate and permit industrial sources such as power plants, auto assembly plants, steel mills, and we review permit applications based on the project proposed, and the permits do not include zoning, noise, and traffic. Next slide. A picture of L'Anse Warden that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Next slide. A little background information. L'Anse Warden was built in 1959 as a coal-fired boiler and steam turbine. At that time, no use permits were required. We didn't have a program until August of 1967. The Federal Clean Air Act was passed in '63 and revised in 1970. Next slide. Again, the John H. Warden Station was constructed, and so all of the equipment at that time when the Air Quality Division was formed was grandfathered until from needing an air permit until changes or physical modifications were made. And that there was a permit in 1973 for the electrostatic precipitator. And then in 2007 is when the company came forward to Air Quality Division and requested to convert the coal natural gas fired boiler into a biomass fired unit. And part of being the biomass boiler, they wanted the ability to burn natural gas, tire-derived fuel, railroad ties, mill sludges, mill ash, fines, and bark. Next slide. Over the next 5 years, there's 4 modifications made to that original permit, which was increasing the annual heat put of natural gas, and increasing the TDF, tire-derived fuel, and fines and bark that could be burned in the boiler. The mill ash and sludge was removed from their fuel list during that time, and testing requirements for arsenic, manganese, nickel, dioxin, furans, and creosote isomers was also removed from their permit after a successful stack test in 2010 showed that they were magnitudes of order below their emission limits. And then pentachlorophenol treated railroad ties were added to the fuel list, and a hydrogen chloride annual emission limit of 9.5 tons per year was added. Next slide. In October of 2015, L'Anse Warden notified the AQD that during a compliance emission test, they exceeded their HCl emission limit. And after AQD reviewed their stack test report, we issued a violation notice on December 1st of 2015. At that time, 2015, early 2016, we were getting quite a few complaints. In late January, early February 2015, after multiple investigations in response to complaints of fugitive dust, a second violation notice was issued to L'Anse Warden. And then at that point, the company and the Air Quality Division entered a negotiation for a consent order to come back into compliance with the violations. And the consent order was issued in October 31st, 2016. And at the same time, PTI 67-16 was issued, which removed the pentachlorophenol treated railroad ties from their fuel portfolio. That was one of the pentachlorophenol treated ties is what, based on the evidence, is what was causing them to exceed their HCl limit. Next slide. And then shortly after that, in 2017 and 2018, L'Anse Warden applied for temporary permits to conduct trial burns of engineered fuel pellets. After successfully running those emission tests, they applied for a permit to permanently burn the engineered fuel pellets, and that was issued in March of 2019. And tonight we're here to discuss the draft ROP conditions that incorporate the conditions of PTI number 128-18. And changes to the draft ROP since the last time you have seen it includes the dry sorbent injection system, the fuel yard, and revised fugitive emission controls, preventive maintenance, fuel procurement plans. So the renewable operating permit, it consolidates all permits to install and all state and federal air quality requirements into one permit. The ROP provides the opportunity for the public to review and comment on the draft ROP, which is why we're here tonight, and the ROP is renewed every 5 years. Who needs an ROP? Major sources of emissions must obtain an ROP. And a major source is a facility with potential emissions greater than 100 tons per year of criteria pollutants, or 10 tons per year of a single hazardous air pollutant, or 25 tons for aggregate hazardous air pollutants. So what happens next? After we, at the end of the public comment period, which October 21st now, we will review all of the written and verbal comments that we received, determine if any changes are needed for testing, record keeping, monitoring, reporting requirements in the permit. We'll make those changes to the ROP, and respond to all comments in writing in the ROP staff report. So the timeline for right now is the public comment period will end midnight, October 21st, 2020. After we review the comments that are received, then and make any changes to the draft ROP, we will send it to the EPA to begin their 45-day review of the proposed ROP. If we receive any comments from EPA, then we'll address those, and then we'll go forward on issuing the final ROP, and all interested parties will be notified. Is this
all right, Ed, is that all you got? You got anything else?
I want to leave more time for everybody's questions. So
yeah, that's great. I think that's awesome. So we're just going to go over again, because I know we had a few people join us as Ed was talking, how you can ask a question. And I see that we already have one question in our question box. So that is good. And Jim, this one is for you. It says that they can't view the attendee chat. It says it's host disabled. So I'm not sure if that is an issue that we can handle right now or not, but I'm going to throw that one over to you. And for the person who asked that question, just to let you know, I can easily send you the links to that information in a email. So there was that one. So thank you very much for that question. So as a reminder, if you are wanting to ask a question, written question, you can go ahead and type that into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. Just click that Q&A button and it will pop up for you to answer or ask your question. If you want to ask a question verbally, which we already have someone raising their hand, so thank you. You just want to go ahead and click that hand icon on the bottom of your screen. And as a reminder, if you're calling in, you're going to go ahead and just type *9 into your phone, and that it will open up a open up your hand up for us, so that we'll be able to see. I want to just remind you who is on our panel. So panelists, if you can go ahead and turn your video cameras back on so we can get ready for the Q&A section here. Just to remind you, you just heard from Ed. I'm Jennifer. I'm going to try not to answer any of the other questions. And then we have Julie Brunner, Brian Hughes, Susan Kilmer, and Katie Cruz. And I'm going to leave this slide up for folks so that they can kind of see who they're talking to, especially folks that are on the phone. Just as a reminder, we're going to be kind of throwing the questions over to our panelists when we get them. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the phone, or not to the phone first, but I'm going to go ahead and unmute our question asker first. And this is Fran Whitman. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. So you should be able to unmute yourself now and go ahead and ask your question of the panel whenever you're ready.
Thank you. My question is, the Warden plant recently had an incident, and I wondered, I had 3 questions actually. Did the company report the incident on their own?
So Ed, do you want to handle that one first? I think that's a good idea, Ms. Whitman, if we can just kind of do them one at a time. Ed, do you want to address that one first?
Sure. The incident that they had did not require them to report to us.
Okay.
Sorry, Fran, let me interrupt. And the incident was came in last week, and it was a resident heard a loud explosion and witnessed what she called black smoke coming out of the stack. And follow-up investigation to that was the opacity during that time frame was 8.6%, which is under their 20% limit. And the loud explosions was attributed to a breaker for the boiler being tripped.
And then Fran, before you ask your next question, I just want to have Ed sort of define opacity for us, because we might have folks listening in that don't really know what that word means.
The opacity would is the, I like to explain, it's the density of the smoke, how able you are to see through that plume coming out of the stack. So the higher the density would be, the thicker the smoke is. So
when you say 8.6%, basically that is 8.6% of the background is covered by the smoke. And so that's going to be less than, do they have a 20% opacity limit?
Correct, yes.
On that? Okay. So Ms. Whitman, if you want to go ahead and ask your next question, that would be great.
My next question was, are they required to report these incidents? But Ed answered it by saying it has to be 20% to report the
And then
smoke.
did you have one more for us then?
Yes, and I don't know, you know, the incident was kind of shocking with the appearance of the smoke and the noise. And so is there a possibility of lowering the incident report level? I mean, that they have to report at 5% instead of 20.
Do you want to go ahead and answer that question as far as, is that something that would be appropriate to comment on?
Well, that's not, the opacity limit would be an emission limit, and through the ROP process, we can't change emission limits. That would be something that would have to go through permitting. But again, the 20% opacity limit, you know, with this incident, it was only 8.6%. In my experience with my investigations out there, they are typically operating at a 1 or 2% opacity. And if you correlate the opacity with the particulate emissions that they're having, that still keeps them well below the opacity limit and their PM emission limits, which were both designed to protect you know, the health of the citizens and the environment in the area.
So I can see why if they're normally operating at 1 to 2% and it was up closer to 10, where that would have made a difference for folks looking at it, and it probably would have seemed abnormal. So that's a great question, Fran. And I think it is confusing the way we do things in air quality, where we have these, I would call them like the little permits that sort of govern different processes at the facility. And then what we're doing tonight and what we're here to kind of talk about, at least primarily, and we're obviously happy to answer any other questions, but talking about kind of taking all those little permits and chunking them into this sort of larger permit that encompasses all the things. So some things when it comes to this aren't necessarily available for comment, and that the opacity limit in this case for this process is not one of those things that we can change through this process. And if the company would come back in for another permit where we would be looking at that, then it would definitely be something that we can consider at that time. So just want to make sure you don't have any other follow-ups before I go ahead and move on to some other questions.
No, thank you very much.
No, not a problem.
Yeah,
All right, I'm going to go ahead and go to the question box here. And this is not necessarily related to what we're here for tonight, but it's a little bit kind of like how does air quality do these sort of things? So the question is, will every individual making comments or asking questions get a personal response from EGLE? So if you make a comment, that's going to be something that goes on the public record that would be addressed in our response to comments document. So yes, you would definitely get notified of that. In general, if you participate in either this meeting tonight or the meeting on the 21st, or you submit a comment on this renewable operating permit, then we will respond to you directly with what happened with the renewable operating permit at the end of the process. So hopefully that answers your question. If it didn't, please feel free to go ahead and ask another one. Okay, this is a long one, and I'm going to read it out loud, but we might have to break it into a couple things here. So it says the Clean Air Act doesn't allow the regulating agency to simply limit its analysis of discharges to the stack. This is an operation that requires a monumental amount of fuel to transport and process the various items that are combusted to produce electricity. So much that simply operating a diesel electrical generator would use less, quote, fossil fuels than what is required to manufacture and transport manufactured fuel pellets, chip and transport rubber tires. Oh, I'm sorry, I think I read that wrong. Sorry, it kind of just moved on my screen there for me. Chip and transport massive amounts of wood chips, transport, and then grind railroad ties. The agency must consider all the discharges to the air associated with each and every one of these activities. Moreover, don't you think you owe it to your leadership to inform Governor Whitmer that this biomass facility has made the village of L'Anse and the L'Anse Indian Reservation the poster child of the environmental justice movement, could produce twice as much electricity simply by burning all the diesel fuel needed to bring all these fuels to L'Anse Warden Electric Company. So I know that's a lot. It's a little bit more of a comment than necessarily a question, but Ed, I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that if you would like to.
Trying to think of the best way to respond to this, Jeffrey. You know, a company comes to us with a permit application requesting to emit air contaminants to the air. However they operate their process, you know, that's something that's reviewed, and we have to issue that permit based on the merits of the application. I'm not certain. I mean, if they're wanting to run a biomass boiler, fueled boiler, then you know, we permitted it that as so that it's protective of the health of the community and the environment. I'm not sure we have the authority to tell a company exactly what they can burn if you know, when they're coming to us with a permit application on their process. I'm not sure if that's a great answer for you, but.
No, I hear where you're going with that, Ed, and I think that that's part of the process that does sometimes frustrate communities, just because the way the process works is, you know, as air quality division staff, we don't go out and try to ask people to submit permit applications, but when they do, we have to look at them in a very prescribed and detailed manner, where we look at those potential effects to human health and the environment and consider all of them individually. So I think, you know, it's sometimes not an answer that folks want, but we do have to, you know, we're obligated to do that as those permit applications come in. Like we said earlier, this isn't necessarily that kind of a permit application. That process happened with those sort of smaller permits that I had talked about earlier, where you kind of see like the 1-07 or -16, those, when we take the renewable operating permit, we're looking at all of those things that have already been evaluated in that manner and putting them into one document that just makes it a little bit easier for companies and our staff and EPA to evaluate whether or not the facility is meeting their obligations that are described in all of those permits together. So just as a reminder, you all can raise your hand if you have more questions. Definitely type them into the question and answer box. We have plenty of time for you to ask questions if you'd still like to do that. I just don't have any other ones right now. So, oh good, we have more questions. Thank you, I appreciate that. So Ms. Adams, I'm gonna go ahead and allow you to talk first. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. You should be able to unmute yourself and talk whenever you would like to, so go right ahead.
Hi, thanks for giving me the opportunity to participate in this meeting. I'm Catherine Andrews and L'Anse area resident. When I was looking at the staff report, it said that the date application was received February 11th, 2015. Also, in the permit itself, it says for renewal of this ROP, an administratively complete application shall be considered timely if it is received by the department not more than 18 months, but not less than 6 months before the expiration date of the ROP. So am I just not finding the application for this particular ROP, or is it indeed true that the application for this ROP is the one that was submitted in February 2015.
Ed, what do you want to go ahead and speak to that?
Yeah, Catherine, that is correct. The application for this permit was submitted in February 2015. There's been a couple modifications submitted when new permits were issued since that time. But as you're fully aware, you know, there have been quite a few issues going on. It was 5 years ago, right around this time, where we were planning on having the public hearing, which is the time when L'Anse Warden conducted their stack test and notified us that they had failed their stack test. And at that time, my supervisor said that we should postpone having the hearing because we wanted to get the company back into compliance before we issued the ROP. And so over the last 5 years, we've had 4 permits issued, and the consent order, we had the public hearing for the consent order. So it is a 5-year process. Sometimes it takes longer, as is the case with L'Anse Warden. It's unfortunate, but yeah, so the application did come in February of 2015. That's the application we're working off of.
And Ms. Andrews, I didn't know if you wanted to do a follow-up for that, but I want to make sure I give you the opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Jennifer. I do. Well, since the facility is not under the same ownership as it was in 2015, I really am confused at why the present owners are not submitting the application for the renewal.
That's a great question. Ed, can you kind of talk about how the permits stay with the equipment and a little bit about how that works? So that's a really good question.
Sure. So the permits are issued for each emission unit or piece of equipment, so for the boiler. And then we'll just use L'Anse Warden as an example. If the company is sold, the new owner takes responsibility of the conditions and the permits that have been issued for that facility. So we don't write or issue new permits every time a new owner takes ownership. The permit is issued, the new source review permit is issued for the life of the equipment. It doesn't have an expiration date. The renewable operating permit, which ties all of those new source review permits into one document, that does have a life of every 5 years when it has to be renewed. And it's regardless of the owner. Whenever there's a new owner coming in, they have to
Assume all those obligations.
Thank you.
Yep,
Thank you.
I took the words right out of your brain for that one.
I wish they were in my brain. Thanks.
No, but I think that's
Yes.
a good way to put it. And we often have that where as long as that equipment doesn't trigger a modification, so there's these very specific and kind of crazy, if you ask me, definitions for reconstructing, modifying, constructing just in general pieces of equipment, and those smaller permits go along with that. So as long as that's when Ed was talking a little bit, and I don't know, Ms. Andrews, if you had, and I know you're very familiar with the facility and kind of what happened, but when Ed was talking a little bit earlier tonight, he talked about how a lot of the equipment at the facility was grandfathered, and we say grandfathered anything installed and not reconstructed or modified before August 15th, 1967. Once we pass that date, if the facility does certain things to that equipment that triggers those, then they have to come in and get those, what Ed called new source review permits. And we just kind of refer to them as air permits. They're not renewable. A company doesn't have to come in and kind of double check with us things. That's what our inspection staff does when they go out, is they ensure that those conditions that are kind of living along with those pieces of equipment aren't changing and don't trigger those other things that would require something to come in and get another permit, like what Fran was asking about earlier with opacity and things like that. So it is kind of confusing, but in a way it's good, because if we have pieces of equipment that haven't been changed and we get a new owner and they have to assume those liabilities when they come in, it makes it a lot easier for our staff to ensure that public health and the environment is still protected as well as it can be underneath those permit conditions. So I know that was very long-winded and I probably didn't have to go into that much detail because I know you are familiar, but hopefully that helped a little bit. And I'm going to give you an opportunity for a follow-up. I do have another hand up, but I want to make sure that we get your questions answered here.
Thank you. I have other questions. I don't
Okay.
I don't want to prolong this one question, but I'll wait until give other people an opportunity. But I do have other questions too.
Okay, perfect. That sounds great. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer this over to Horst Schmidt, and he, I think, has a question. I'm going to unmute you, Horst, so you can ask your question. You should be good to be unmuted anytime you want, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Can you understand me?
Yes, I can. You sound wonderful.
I have a question. At the time of the transfer from Traxxas to Convergence, there was problems with having stack tests or a stack test during the 5-year period. And I don't think one was ever done. And I was wondering between now and then, have there been any stack tests to test the emissions? And then the other thing that I remember from that time was that there was a hole in the side of the stack, and I was wondering if that was ever repaired. I'll take your answers, and I may have other questions, but if someone else wants to go ahead, I will wait until there's an opening again.
That sounds good, Horst. So let me go ahead and we'll,
one
go
other
ahead.
thing.
Nope, go ahead.
Could you ask Mr. Lancaster to speak up a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I will. I was having that same issue, which is when you said, how do I sound? And I said, you sounded wonderful. I already told Ed earlier that he needed to speak up. So Ed, you might want to just speak up a little bit. But if you want to talk a little bit about the stack testing that's gone on and definitely address whether or not that hole in the stack has been fixed, that would be great.
The easy one is the hole in the stack was repaired. September of last year, I believe it was when it was repaired. It might have been earlier than that. As far as the stack testing, they tested again in July of 2016. If you remember, that was the test that the EPA required them to do. And then with the 2 trial burn permits that they were issued, they were stack testing during both of those. And those were more engineering design stack tests, but they were required to, while they were burning the pellets on a trial basis, they were required to test to make sure they were in compliance with all of their emission limits. And so the last stack test would have been in 2018. Their next scheduled compliance stack test is in June of next year, 2021. Which
So,
would be I'm sorry, Jen, but that would be
No,
5
go ahead.
years from the July 2016 test. They're required to test every 5 years.
So just as a follow-up to that, just to let folks know that are on the line that might not know this, we do post the stack test executive summaries online. So if you wanted to look at any of the ones that we have posted, I can definitely get those links to you as well. They're a little bit tricky to find. So as a caveat to this whole conversation, if you ever can't find something online that you were looking for, just call me or send me an email and I will find it for you in 2 seconds. So you do not have to waste your time. If it's there, I probably already know where it is. But we do post those. So if you're interested in those results, because it sounds like Mr. Schmidt, like some of those you might not have been aware of or what the results were. So we can definitely share that information with folks as well. Did you have one other follow-up question? And then Ms. Andrews does have her hand up again. So if I allow you one more, then I'll probably pass it over to her a minute.
The other question was the hole in the stack ever repaired?
Yes, it was repaired. And I believe that was last year. I have a letter from the company and I just can't remember off the top of my head, but I think they had to repair it by September of last year. And that was done.
So did you hear that, Mr. Schmidt? September of last year? Okay, perfect. Because I know Ed's kind of quiet tonight.
Sorry.
All right. No, you're fine. I think it's your equipment. It's faulty state equipment, I'm sure. All right, Ms. Andrews, I'm going to go ahead and you should be able to still unmute yourself, but if you want to go ahead and answer, ask another question, and then I'm going to go ahead and go to one of our written questions, but I'll let you go ahead and do one first. So you should be good to go as soon as you're ready, Ms. Andrews. But don't forget to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we
Yes.
sure can.
Okay, thank you. So this ROP has a lot of references to the pellets. But it doesn't have any references to the acid gases that are created when the pellets are burned. Those acid gases are sulfuric acid mist, hydrofluoric acid, and sulfur dioxide. Of course, sulfur dioxide is in the permit because that's emission from other fuels, but these specific acid gases are directly linked to the fuel pellets. And I'm wondering why they are not incorporated in the ROP.
So Ed, I don't know if you can answer that one. That sounds like something that would have been evaluated during the new source review process. So we'd probably, Ms. Andrews, have to go back to those original permits and look at why there wasn't limits put in those permits at the time that they were issued. So I'm not sure if you can answer that, Ed, or not. If you feel like you can, otherwise we can always get back to you on that question as well.
I'm thinking that was that was probably answered in the response to comments document for the last permit 168-18. But if I recall correctly, HCl was the gas of higher concentration, the one that was more significant that we focused on. And if they were able to meet the limits of the hydrogen chloride gas, then the other gases would again be below that and would be protective of the community and the environment.
So that was our worst case scenario is what we were looking at. And,
Yes.
okay, and everything else was below that. So we'll double check that, Ms. Andrews, and just make sure that we have the right answer for you. And then if you don't mind getting that via email, we can definitely do that.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead. Horst, you still have your hand up, and I don't know if you have another question or not, but if you do, I'll get to you in a minute. And if you don't, if you want to go ahead and click that hand raising button and put your hand down. This is more of a comment, and so I'm just going to read it out loud for you. And just as a reminder, if you have specific comments that you want to go on the record, you're going to want to submit those in writing via the other mechanisms that we'll talk about in a minute, or obviously participate in that virtual public hearing. But it says, in reference to the stack test, KBIC, which is the Keweenaw Indian community, is requesting a delay of this ROP approval until the stack testing is complete and reviewed by staff. The Keweenaw Indian community's concern is that the continued burning of this fuel, which I'm assuming is the pellets, without the results of a completed stack test is within the operating permit. So it sounds to me like the concern is whether or not emissions from the burning of the pellets, I'm assuming it's pellets, so correct me if I'm wrong, is within the limits in the ROP.
Well, I guess I can respond to that in a couple ways. And one is that the stack testing is just one method that we use to show compliance. They are also required to do a lot of record keeping and monitoring of their processes to make sure that they are staying within their emission limits. They're in compliance with their emission limits. The second part of that is currently, since June, L'Anse Warden has not been burning any fuel pellets. They're in the process of trying to find a new contractor for pellets. But from my latest conversations with them last week, they have not been burning any pellets since June. And that's really what we would like them to do when they do their stack test again, is that we want them doing it to conduct it while they are burning the fuel pellets, as that's going to be a more representative of their operations.
Okay, so Mr. Schmidt, I'm going to go back to you for a second. If you want to ask another question, you should be able to unmute your mic and ask that.
Hey, I'm unmuted.
Yes, you are.
If I recall, the state uses the Cassini air monitoring unit as a way of determining the air quality. Is that correct?
Susan can probably speak to kind of what we use the CNE air monitor for. Susan, I know you're on, and if you want to just verify that we do use that one specifically for ambient air quality.
Yes, we
follow up after that.
Of course, sure.
Yes, we have an air monitoring station in Seney, and at that location we monitor ozone and fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5. And that monitoring station is there basically to measure those two pollutants, to evaluate the general air quality in that part of the state. And the parameters that we measure there are not used for compliance or anything like that for any nearby facility. The ambient air measurements really are just to monitor, record, and communicate what the air quality is in that area.
So Horst, did you have a follow-up to that?
I have something that's not parallel, but adjacent to it. That's the fact that I believe Bay Indian community has been approved by the EPA to be treated as a state, so that it now has authority over the air in its reservation areas. Is that correct?
Susan, can you respond to that? And I don't know if there's any monitoring information that is coming up as far as that goes that you could share too.
I don't know as far as the being treated as state aspect. That might be something Katie Cruz can answer, but I can say in speaking with them, I know that they are in the process of getting some type of a grant, and they're exploring doing some air monitoring on their own. They're looking at some different sensor technology and just kind of what's available. But I think they're kind of in the early phases of trying to perhaps put together an air monitoring program or site. And we here at EGLE are very interested and willing to help collaborate with them, provide them information, resources, and answer any questions they have. So I have been in communication with them, and so has Ed. So that's kind of what I know about that.
No, that's great. And Katie, I don't know if you can unmute yourself because I know you're traveling, but if you could address Horst's question about KBIC being looked at as a state, that would be awesome.
So KBIC has recently received TAS under the Clean Air Act for early notification. And they have also received TAS under the Clean Water Act, which is for development of water quality standards.
Katie, thanks. I appreciate that. You're a little bit quiet. So Horst, were you able to hear what Katie said on that?
I did. And
okay, good.
To ask a question regarding when they would get a air monitoring unit, would that be the one that the state would be using as a barometer of air quality versus using CINI?
That's a great question. Susan, do you want to talk about how our relationship with the tribe may work if they do get some monitors in place? And then Horst, I'm going to have someone else be able to ask a question because we have a new hand raiser. So just to let you know, I'm going to go ahead and mute you.
Yes. So my understanding, KBIC is, I think, has already received a grant or is in the process of either applying for or has received a grant to do some monitoring. And my understanding is that, again, they're kind of looking at sensor technology, which is not regulatory per se, but it is a way in which you can measure different pollutants in the air. So that the sensors that they would be getting and using really would be something that they would kind of be using for their own purpose and to evaluate the air quality. I wouldn't say that the data that's generated from those sensors would not be used to compare to the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which is what our monitoring stations do. When we're looking at ozone and PM2.5 and CINI, we're comparing those values to the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Sensor technology is a very useful tool, but they are not what we would say regulatory monitors. So even if KBIC does their own monitoring, we would still keep operating the site in CINI. But as I stated, we'd be very interested in kind of assisting and collaborating however we can, just to assist them with getting their program going, or if we have documents. We have a wealth of knowledge in my group, lots of really experienced people. So hopefully we would be able to be a resource.
Well, and more information in that regard is never bad thing. So I would say for sure. So
Sure.
I'm gonna go ahead, and we have a another asker, another hand raised. So I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you, Peg. Hold on one second. And so as soon as you are ready, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. This is more of a comment, I guess, than a question. Well, I guess I have some questions too. I'm rather new at this and haven't paid a lot of attention until we have been out on our deck and have had family up this summer. And at least 3 or 4 times we've had to run in the house because of the awful smell. And one time my daughter ran down from upstairs assuring me the basement was on fire. Now, if this is to go through, this permit, is this something we will live with all the time? Or is it something that they're working on to fix as far as the, I guess, the odor that's usually a south wind. And I'm just kind of wondering about that.
Sure. No, that's a great question. I'm going to go ahead and have Ed kind of talk about what community members should do if they are experiencing strong odors, especially if they are causing you to change your behaviors, close windows, go inside, things like that. So Ed, can you just talk a little bit about how a community member would get a hold of you or Joe to lodge a complaint?
Sure. Definitely you want to contact us as soon as possible so we can make it out to verify your complaint. And then there's a couple ways of doing that. We have our pollution, after hours, you can call our pollution emergency number. And if you're ready, the phone number is 1-800-292-4706.
292?
Correct.
4706.
And
Yes.
Peg, I'll go ahead and I'll email this out to everybody too, so you guys all have the pollution emergency alert system number as well.
Okay, and is it basically something we'll just have to live with? Or is this something that can be remedied over time? Or, I just really don't know much about it. And I guess that's my question.
And that's what we would do as part of our investigation. We would try and find the source of the odors, and then we would do an odor survey in the area, and we would see what we determine. So
Okay.
It's really hard to speak hypothetically. That's why it's so important for you to call us so we can get out there as soon as we can to conduct our investigation. That would be the best way of doing it.
Okay, and another question, I'm sure this is silly, but does the air quality have any ability to do soil tests or water tests around the area, or is that just a whole nother company or another area of expertise?
It would be another division that would do the water or the soil sampling, sure.
Okay, do you know if they do that at all?
It depends.
Thank you, Jen.
No, I think it depends, Peg. And so here's what I would offer up on that. If you, I'll send out Ed's email address. I'm going to throw you under the bus here a little bit, Ed, but Ed knows all the other folks that work in the UP district office. And if you have specific concerns, so you'll get his email address. If you have specific concerns about things, definitely put them down. Send them in an email to Ed. That way he can kind of parse them out to folks in the district office that might be able to answer those questions or directly deal with that. And then as far as odors go, odors are a hard one for us sometimes. Not to say that we can't do anything about them. They just sometimes are more challenging because it might take a little bit to identify where the odors are coming from. We have a specific way that we evaluate them. We have to look at how strong are they, how frequent are they, what's the intensity, how long do they last, things like that in order to be able to really kind of make a change. That doesn't mean that you have to live with it. So I don't want you to think that. People get frustrated. Sometimes they feel like they're smelling odors every day. And if you are, give us a call, because we do want to know that. We can't figure things out if we don't have that ability to be able to get out there and experience what you're experiencing. So I don't want to discourage you from giving us a call on that.
Okay, great. Well, I thank you for that. Very
Yeah,
good.
and you know, the staff is available. We do have the panel together tonight, not only because, you know, we're having this conversation tonight, but we are available to ask and answer further questions as we go down the line. And I just want folks to know that it is 5 before 7. Peg, I'm gonna go ahead and mute you, just so you know. I don't want to cut you unawares there. And then I want to have, I think this is a really good question, Ed, that I want you to make sure you answer before we close things down for the night. And not to say we're going to close them right away, but we'll have time for a couple more questions. But this has to do with the fuel pellets again. And it says, if a new contractor is found to supply fuel pellets, will the composition of those pellets be the same as those that have been used until recently? Will the public be told of any differences in the pellet composition? And will EGLE confirm that the new pellets will meet pollution standards before they are burned? So can you talk a little bit about our process when a company brings in sort of, even though pellets in general wouldn't necessarily be a new fuel, how we kind of look at things when we get, quote, new fuels coming in?
And the company does have a plan set up to analyze those samples. And again, the pellets would have to be very close to what Convergence supplied. If they wanted to use a pellet that had substantially different makeup than the pellets they were permitted for, they would have to come back into permits, and we would have to relook at the makeup of those pellets.
Yep, that would have to go through a whole nother review process if they were going to be, you know, different than what was there before. And I don't know if you can talk about whether or not that permit might go through public comment. I guess that kind of would be something we would have to decide at the time a permit would come in, whether or not that would go through public comment. Not to say that that isn't something that we could let folks know about. That's definitely an easy thing.
Right, right. And just, you know, because there has been so much interest in L'Anse Warden, typically if a permit application comes in, that is something that would go through or would have a public hearing for, just because there's such an interest in what's going on at the facility.
Yep, and we definitely want to make sure that folks know what's going on and that we can be as transparent as possible. And sometimes maybe these meetings aren't the best way, but I appreciate all the questions you guys are asking tonight. And we do have somebody else with their hand up that hasn't asked a question yet. So I'm going to go ahead and go to you. This is Rosemary Greyer. She has a question. So Rosemary, when you would like, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, it's Rosemary. And I'm curious now, who is the owner of the Warden plant right now?
Ed?
I don't have that information. I know it's L'Anse Warden, and you know they're operating, they're running it, but I don't know who their parent company is.
Rosemary, did you have a follow-up?
Well, yeah, I mean, when a former owner leaves a company, isn't it standard protocol to inform, like, you know, your department that there's been a change in ownership?
So are you asking whether or not they should have like notified us that they had a change in ownership? Is that what you're asking?
Right, right. Because
sure.
you know, I'm a public person and I live, you know, in the general vicinity of L'Anse. And if there's been a change of ownership, it would be nice for the public to know that. And it seems to me that the state would need to know that too.
It's kind of what gets back to a question that was asked earlier. It doesn't matter who the new owner is, they still have to operate the facility according to the permits that they have.
No, I hear. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Right, I heard that answer, but again, you know, it's just the question of ownership. Do I need to call the Warden plant and ask them?
You could do that.
Yeah, and I think what that goes back to, Rosemary, is that our rules, we don't have any authority to obligate somebody to let us know. As long as they have a company that they're operating under that has assumed responsibility for the permit conditions, we can't make them tell us who owns that company in general. So I'm sure it's a matter of public record. It just might take some digging, I guess. If you're very sleuthy, maybe you can figure it out, or.
It just seems a little secretive. I mean, I've seen the ad in our local papers for a new plant manager or operator. So I guess the other thing I wanted to just comment on was what typically, kind of turnover is there with these kinds of plants? Because there seems to be with a Warden plant, some turnover more recently than in the past. So is it a changing market that's going on right now? Is biomass being challenged by, other industries? Do you have any insight on that?
Ed, I don't know if you would have any insight on that at all. If you do, think about that for a second. I just want to note something here really quickly. So just to let everybody know, it is after 7. So what I want to do is, if you want to respond to Rosemary's question, I mean, that's not something that we would normally deal with, but if you want to respond to it, that's great. And then I have a couple more people with their hands up. So I want to give everybody an opportunity to ask one more question. So if you've already asked a question, you have one more question. We'll get to one more question here from everyone who has their hand up. And then we will probably close it down for tonight. So just to let you know. So Ed, if you want to go ahead and respond to Rosemary's comment, that would be great. Rosemary,
I'm not an economist. I'm not sure, these are all business decisions I'm not smart enough to know why that's occurring.
Okay, all right, thank you.
No problem, Rosemary. Thanks for asking, though. It is definitely something interesting to think about for sure.
All right.
All right, Peg, I'm going to unmute you a second here again. So if you would like to go ahead and ask one more question tonight, that'd be great.
That wasn't me.
Oh, all right. You still had your hand up, so I want to make sure that I give you a really good opportunity to ask. So
Thank you so much.
No, that's no problem.
I forgot to take it down.
Zoom sometimes doesn't make things easy for us, and I didn't want to lower your hand out of turn. So I'm going to go ahead and see if do you want to have one more question there, Mr. Schmidt?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
The question is the cheaper for the railroad ties. I recall that the company was required to make sure that it captured the dust from the chipping process, and I was wondering if this has been checked to see if all of the necessary dust covers on the conveyor and everything are intact, so that it maintains the dust in within the facility rather than going into the air around there. So that's my question.
So I don't know, Ed, if you want to talk, I don't know if you or Joe did the last inspection, but this might be a good inspection type question.
Yeah, Joe would have been the last inspector.
So Joe, I know he's on. Joe, do you want to unmute yourself a minute and then respond to that question if you have an answer? And if you don't, we can always get back to Mr. Schmidt. Joe sometimes has very poor internet connection.
I'm here.
That out there. Okay, good. We can hear you.
Could you repeat the question again, though?
Yeah. So Mr. Schmidt was asking whether or not the conveyors were covered and dust controls were in place, specifically related to the railroad tie process.
As far as the conveyor coming from the fuel storage bins, yes, they were covered. Yeah.
So that part of the inspection was passed, is what basically we're saying. And I guess we can always send out the most recent inspection report. Do you know when that last inspection was done, just so that we can kind of put that out there? A time, not an exact date, but a time frame.
Oh, early 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, it would have been last fiscal
believe.
year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right, that sounds good. So we can definitely share that as well. And Ed, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say, unless there's complaints, L'Anse Warden is on a every 2-year schedule to be inspected. So this fiscal year coming up, starting October 1st, there will be another inspection within the fiscal year.
I do remember there was still snow on the ground, so it was probably March.
That could have been all year up there for you guys, really.
No, I believe it was spring of 2019.
I know Ed told me that it's supposed to snow this weekend up there, so I'm feeling like sort of envious in a way, and sort of like, whew, I'm really glad I'm just feeling fall down here still. But all right, well, thanks a lot, Joe. I appreciate you responding to that question.
Absolutely.
Yep, no problem. So we're going to go, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ed.
Sorry, Jim.
Nope.
The other part
No,
of
you're
Forrest's
fine.
question was the grinding of the railroad ties. And Joe, do you happen to, we don't always make it to the fuel yard during our inspections because most of the emissions are coming right from the plant itself. So I'm not sure if Joe was able to make it to the fuel yard during its inspection to see. And they're not always grinding over there because our inspections are typically unannounced and they don't always grind 24 hours a day. So
I did go to the fuel yard and they were grinding at the time. I do recall that it was very muddy in the yard because it was spring. And there's quite a bit of snow melt on everything. So there wasn't, there's quite a bit of moisture in the ties that were being ground. There was no fugitive dust that I observed.
Okay.
thanks, Joe.
That's good to know. So thank you guys very much for all your questions tonight. I know just to remind you, we're going to go over a little bit about how you can submit comments and that in case you can't join us for the meeting on the 21st. So you can send your comments on the ROP right to Ed. And for those folks that are on the phone, I am going to go ahead and read the address for you, although I am pretty sure you guys are all good to be able to figure it out, but I want to make sure that folks on the phone can write this down if they want to. So the address is the Marquette District Office and it's Air Quality Division. So if you just write AQD on there, that will usually get it to Ed. And the address is 1504 West Washington Street. And that's in Marquette. And the zip there is 49855. Or you can send comments directly to Ed's email address. And his email address is his last name, Lancaster, E1@Michigan.gov. So I'm going to spell that out for you. It's L as in lion, A as in apple, N as in Nancy, C as in cat, A as in apple, S as in Sam, T as in Tom, E as in elephant, R as in red, E as in elephant, the number 1, and it's at Michigan, all spelled out, .gov as in government. And then of course, join us for the public hearing on October 21st. And anybody who did register or attend the meeting and submitted a email address, I will send a note after this meeting, not tonight probably, just to let you know, with some follow-up information that's going to show you where you can find this types of information that's on the screen right now. So the public notice itself, if you're interested, the draft renewable operating permit, the staff report, the application, any associated plans. So remember, you're going to go to this, the web location that I sent you, and I also put that in the chat if you wanted to grab it from there. And then once you get there, you do have to scroll down to get to L'Anse, just to let you know. For those folks on the phone, you are not going to be able to see this, and I'm not going to torture you all by reading all of these out loud. But if you are interested, we've got everyone's contact information on the screen right now. I will share that in my follow-up email as well, so you'll have that at your fingertips by the end of the week for sure. Remember that we do record these, and we will send you a link to the recording in case you're interested or you know someone else who is interested in learning more about what's going on at L'Anse and their renewable operating permit right now. So I'll send you a bunch of information. Hopefully that's one of those things too, where too much information is not a bad thing. You guys can kind of parse through it. Definitely ask more questions if you have them. Just remember that those comments, those official comments on the record are looked at differently than just this Q&A that we're having tonight, and possibly some questions that you might be asking staff in the interim between now and the end of the comment period. So that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening. We really, really appreciate you participating with us tonight, taking time out of your evening to sit and listen and ask such great questions. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon, or we'll see you on the 21st.